So tell me a little bit about what exactly these experiments are all about and how you got into them.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the experimental side of me has always been there. Like there's stories from when I was a kid that my mom tells me nowadays, or that other family members will tell me nowadays about how I always asked why, and I always wanted to know the deeper meaning to things, and I always wanted to understand how things worked. So it's interesting to me that of all things, beer and brewing is where I've been able to really invest a lot of that kind of experimental energy and being able to, probably because I feel like it's safe, so basically how it started though, I had a buddy who I was brewing with for a while, and he had to move away from town, and I started brewing way back in January of 2003, and my buddy and I started brewing together in 2010 or 11, late 2010, early 2011, and we were brewing together every other week. We'd really gotten into it. We'd built kind of this system together. He'd always come to my place. And because of work, he had to move out of town. And when he moved out of town, I realized that I was getting kind of bored with just brewing beer for myself. This kind of sounds cheesy, but I realized at the same time that brewing for me had become something more than just beer, right? And more than just about the process of making beer. That it was the community. It was that component of being with another person who enjoyed this thing with me. So to kind of stave off this boredom and knowing that I wanted to stay in the hobby, I decided that I'd start messing around with different variables and kind of go the risky route of let's see what it's going to take for me to really screw up a batch of beer. And which is nuts. I know. You love it because you're not doing it, but the reality is I think a lot of homebrewers kind of avoid experimenting because, brewing beer is a long process and it costs money and there's a lot that goes into it. And I kind of decided to throw that to the wind and see what we could do. And at the time it was just me, and started testing stuff out. And I did some yeast comparisons, and then I moved on to the Trube experiment, which is really what seemed like it got the wheels rolling for Brülosophy. When I published that information,
and that was 2014, I think, right? I was just checking out your list of projects, and I was blown away by just how many you guys have accumulated now. I was taking a look at the most recent list on your database there, and was like, God damn, because it, like you said, it does take a lot of time. So thank you for doing this for us.
Oh my God, it's I guess it's my pleasure. But the thing that I think a lot of people wonder, one of the questions that I've been getting a lot lately, at least, is, so since this has become a job, well, it really hasn't. This is still my hobby. My hobby has shifted from home brewing to kind of homebrew experimenting. But I just had 6 guys out in my garage 20 minutes before you and I started chatting, collecting data and drinking beers together, and just that community, having people here and doing that. But yeah, so when we did the Trube experiment, I started getting people. There was some other stuff out there I'd written about harvesting yeast from starters and then fermenting lagers quicker, which I've even adapted that whole thing since then. But people saying, hey, you should compile this on a website. And so having no knowledge whatsoever about what it means to run a website, I decided to start one. And that was basically the genesis of Brülosophy. And we just kind of started, well, again, I started going along and I started publishing fairly regularly and testing out all of the variables that everyone wonders about, but is too afraid to try for themselves because they don't want to ruin a batch. It's understandable. Right. And that's how it got going.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and of course the website side of things, I know about that and how it goes so smoothly all the time. Websites never go down.
Never, yeah. You don't get hacked or anything like that.
That becomes kind of a hobby on its own too. Not necessarily a good hobby that we enjoy, but it's just a necessary evil.
It's a pain in my ass, man. I'll tell you that much. Whew.
I know you guys were dealing with that recently. I was too.
Oh, yeah. You guys got the whole hack like we did. And
it wasn't a hack. It was just a server issue, but it was going on for about a month. It's still, knock on wood. I hope it's over now. But yeah, so you have the homebrewing on top of that, and then the whole distribution side of all this content too, getting it out there into the world, the website and all that.
Yeah, right.
So I just hope people appreciate all that goes into this. Because I think that's, and like what I was saying in the beginning, that you actually, you come to conclusions that you can use to actually improve your brewing, and not just improve your brewing, but actually brew more.
Yeah, and the way I like to look at it is it might improve your brewing. We don't try to sell it as that, but it can definitely, depending on how you interpret the results for yourself, it can definitely improve your brewing experience, right? And make your brew day a little bit easier. Sure.
Well, that's the thing, and shorter too, because a lot of these experiments, the ones I like the most are the ones where you say, oh yeah, you can do this in X amount of time instead of X plus whatever.
Right.
Where you cut down on any of these processes, because we talk about this a lot. We only have so many, most of us only have so many brew days on our calendar for the year.
Yeah.
There's only so many we can get in. And if we can take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and get a whole new brew day out of that, because we were able to, I guess shortcuts is the wrong word, right? How would you put it? But
I don't know.
Figure out a better way to do things and get the same result or even a better result. And if that can earn you back just one brew day, another batch of beer, then hell yeah, man.
Hey, dude, hell yeah, I'm right there with you. It's funny. And I totally understand this sentiment, but people when they think about Brülosophy, I think nowadays there's this kind of undercurrent belief that our whole sole intent in starting this whole thing was to prove authority wrong. And yes, I'm a psychologist in my real life, and so I do think about things like cognitive biases and logical fallacies and the way that we are influenced by bias, right? And that stuff interests me. But I'll be dead honest with you. When I first started the experiments, there was this little bug in my ear that was like, maybe if I can go and prove all these people right, they'll be my friends, right? Because I want community. I want these people to be these are my bros, Mm-hmm. And so that was really the initial intent. And that Trube one was, I was fully 100% expected to see the, high Trube beer to have all this haze and to not taste as good and to have all, and of course it was the exact opposite that came back. And from that point, I have not changed my position on it in terms of expectation. Sure, I tend to follow the data, and so if we've got four iterations of a different experiment with different styles and whatnot, and all of those four line up against the common knowledge, then sure, I might start to be inclined to think that this next one might as well. But the reality is, man, I still have faith in tradition, and I think that there's value in that. And there are people out there who really appreciate brewing to tradition, and that is not what we're questioning. We're not out here saying that people shouldn't do that. Do what you love doing. For me, it's experimenting. It's not trying to prove anyone right or wrong, right? And I think that's something that gets missed quite a bit when it comes to what it is we're doing.
I want to. That's a good point. I want to stay on that for a little bit. So, and I noticed that there are some, once in a while, a stir up in the comments.
Once in a while,
yeah. on your site or on Facebook is probably more common. Just.
I think Reddit's probably the most common. But
okay, I'm not as active on there. But I can imagine that. So what is, and maybe this is it, what you just said, but what is the biggest misconception people have about what you guys do?
Oh, that's good. I think there's a few, and I think. To preface this, I think that the crew of us that have come together, we've kind of congealed together, the six of us who do this stuff regularly. We're all pretty good at dealing with it. So it's not like it hurts our feelings. We want people to say what they disagree with. But to answer the question, I think probably the biggest misconception is that we are out there to try to disprove authority. And this is the part that does suck, is that people will assume that accepting that kind of erroneous belief that's our intent, they will assume that we are in some way influencing the data that we collect so that we look right. And that's, I don't know how to contend with that. Lately we've just been ignoring those arguments because the more defensive you get, it looks like, what are we defending? That's not what we're doing. We don't care enough to do that. What we care about is homebrewing. Yeah. That's what we love, and we love experimenting, and we love the validity of what it is that we're doing. We want it to be as valid as possible. So when people do that, to us, what it ends up looking like is, well, you obviously don't know us very well, and two, it looks like you're really trying to defend your position because you don't want to let go of the belief that you have. And the reality is, we're sitting here saying we might be wrong. This is one data point. So I guess the second misconception, in fact, would be that that if we find, one result says that something doesn't matter that we thought did, that means that it will never ever matter, and that's just not true. We're producing one data point, and our hope is that other people, ourselves included, will engage in the experimental process and really try to flesh this stuff out. I mean, we are, interestingly, in a very young age when it comes to homebrew experimentation. Right? We've got a lot of science to back up what happens when you brew, how it happens, but really there's not very much out there in terms of the practical results and what certain things produce that are detectable in a sensory analysis.
And that's the key thing, because we understand the science pretty well, but then there's this area that's a little bit fuzzier when it comes to what we actually taste.
Right.
And maybe under a microscope, these things do make a difference, but at the end of the day, if you can't taste a difference, what does it really matter?
Well, and again, I guess that goes into the argument of, you know, but people did it this way for hundreds of years.
Right.
And now, you know, these jerks are coming along and saying that it may not need to be done that way.
Yeah.
But what that argument fails to consider is the fact that in those hundreds and hundreds of years that people started doing it that way and no changes have been made, other changes have been made. And those changes have been made in the way that, you know, malt is malted, in the way that hops are harvested and stored, and in the way that yeast is propagated. And there's so many things that have adapted and evolved over time, and yet process hasn't really very much. And so to me, it's not an effort to try to disprove anything. I just think it's fascinating to test this stuff out and to see what other people can taste.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, you guys do some experiments where I think, you know, I consider myself a pretty savvy home brewer, but you do some things and I'm like, man, that is a great, I've always just taken that as gospel, but that's a great idea. Does that really make a difference? I think part of it is when you get into home brewing, it's so overwhelming. Yeah. And you can go deep. You can go really deep into the hobby. And when you're just getting started, when you first get that kit, that equipment kit, and that malt extract kit, you're not thinking about testing trub and testing yeast starters and testing got low dough, you know, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's so much material there that you don't question it. You're like, I just hope I don't fuck this batch up.
Right. No, it's true. And I think there is also, and this is where I start to sound like a weirdo, but I think there is value in digging your fingers in as deeply as possible. I think it's only when we do that we're able to see from the inside out sometimes, right? And that there's no negative connotation to that. You know, again, I started my career or my studies in psychology when I was in junior high, and I never left it. And as much as I kind of wish I would have rethought things back then, it wasn't until I got in super duper deep that I was able to see what it was that I didn't like about it. Unfortunately, I already had a career at the time, but it's the same thing. Yeah, you know, it is what it is. We're all adults. Yeah. But you know, it's the same thing with homebrewing, and the beauty of homebrewing is that nobody gets hurt. You know, it's not we're not trying to cure cancer here. We don't have to take this shit very seriously. We can be cool about it, and in the end, hey, worst case scenario, you've still got a batch of beer you get to drink, and cheers to the person you disagree with at the end of the day. And that's the way I look at this. You know, there's never any, you know, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, basically.
Right, exactly. It doesn't need to be taken too seriously. It really shouldn't be. So I'm curious about the Brülosophy, the operation, how this machine works. Can you take us behind the scenes a little bit? And you don't have to go into tons of detail, but just kind of give us. Let's start at, okay, we have some ideas. I'm sure you guys have a crap load of ideas, right?
We have a crap load, yeah. It's called the list.
The list. Where do these ideas come from? How do they get onto the list? How do you choose what to do next? And then take us through just like high level what that process looks like all the way through posting results to the blog.
Sure. So to be honest with you, the other contributors, and I'm going to name drop a little bit because they're awesome guys. You got Malcolm Fraser, Jake Houlihan, Ray Found, Greg Foster, and Matt Del Fiacco. These are the guys who work with me to put this stuff out so that we can do it weekly. There's no way I'd be able to do it by myself, but these are guys who have expressed just as big of a passion in this weird stuff that we do as me. But the truth is, we are constantly in contact with each other, and so what'll typically happen is the list these days, which there is a real list. People always make fun of me for this, but there is a genuine list in Google Forms, right? It's a Google Doc. And we keep a list of all of these different variables, and we break them down by process, ingredient, and gear. Most of what we have is process. People seem the most interested in that. The list these days is hugely populated with ideas that we get from readers and now podcast listeners, stuff that they want to see. And so we'll just, every time somebody emails me, if it's not already on the list, I'll go and I'll add it, because why not? And then we'll basically, when somebody's ready to brew an experiment batch, which we're all brewing about every other week at this point, what we'll do is we'll pick it up, and then before just settling on the experiment design, we will consult with each other. We have an email group, and then we use like a messenger type of group to chat with each other very often, almost all day. And then we'll kind of pluck away at a design, and it's one of those things where when we're done with an experiment, people will question the design, and one of the few things that I'll get a little bit, I have to kind of breathe deep about is when people question the design, and not that they question the design. I'm cool with that. It's when they question that we didn't think about it hard enough, because every experiment that you read about today, I promise you, has been discussed 2 months prior to the person brewing it. But we don't feel like it's necessary for us to go and over explain ourselves and why we did everything we did. So anyways, we'll have all of us consult, and we design the experiment together, and then the brewer will go off and stick as closely to that design as possible. And as every home brewer knows, consistency is key, but at the same time, there are going to be little missteps. And so we try to account for that when it comes to the design of the experiment, and we'll make fun of each other when there's a misstep between the batches. And those are the only times we'll kind of forego the experiment, is if there's a huge misstep between the actual batches that couldn't be better accounted for by the variable that we're testing.
Gotcha.
Once the beer is brewed, depending on the variable, it could be a two-week fermentation and finishing, or it can be up to a few months. Once the beer is brewed, though, it'll be fermented out and get ready. We keg all of our beers. We're not doing, unless the variable involves bottle conditioning. One of the things for us is that we keg them up. And so we won't serve the beers until we think they are fully ready, which is usually indicated by at least one of them dropping clear. Most of us fine our beers with gelatin to kind of expedite that process. Oh yeah, it's so money, man, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh God, I love it. Yeah.
I use it in my beers and my meatloaf, man.
I've never used it in my meatloaf. I'll have to try that out.
I got it. If you know Cooks Illustrated, those guys.
Yeah,
I'm sure you know Cooks Illustrated.
I know who they are. I've never talked to them, but yes.
They have. Oh, you would love this book. I think it's by them. I think it's called The Science of Good Cooking.
Okay.
I can't believe I just thought about this. They do experiments. They experimented with meatloaf to find the perfect meatloaf.
Oh my God, I gotta check this out.
And now I'm giving away my secret. I always call this my meatloaf recipe. It's totally not my meatloaf recipe.
Yeah, my wife does that with everything she cooks, by the way. So.
I know. It's from the Science of Good Cooking book, and there's a little bit of gelatin used in it, and that's what really holds it together, and it's incredible. The best meatloaf ever. So anyways, it's the same exact gelatin I use in the meatloaf and for finding my beer.
Well, I'm gonna do it now. I'm gonna go look that up. So so once that beer's ready to serve, what we'll usually do is we all have different ways of data collection, and this is really the struggle. There's a little bit of fear in potentially ruining a batch, but I'll tell you what, man, trying to get a minimum of 20 people together, we try to aim for 18 to 20 minimum participants for each experiment. Trying to get that many people to come out and perform the triangle test, it can be tough. It can be tough.
That's what I've always wondered about. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a lot. That's got to be kind of like cat herding at times too.
And usually what'll happen. So we all kind of do things differently. So Malcolm, who lives out in Pittsburgh area, usually what he'll do, he has a lot of connections at various breweries, and so he'll connect with a brewery and they'll set up an event. It won't change anything about the brewery's normal plan, but they'll open up an area for him to collect data, and so he's able to get in 2 or 3 hours he's able to collect 30 data points, 35 data points, which is really nice. On the other end of the scale would be somebody like me who lives in a fairly small town. I live out here in Fresno, California, where we've got breweries that aren't necessarily open, or they're really far away. They're not open at the times that I would be collecting data mostly,
Right.
or I get off work and everyone's already had 4 or 5 beers when I show up, and we want to try to avoid that as well. And so usually what I do, like I did today, is I'll schedule over one weekend. I'll just have multiple events scheduled where people come out and hang out in my garage for a couple hours, and I'll usually, it's a lot of fun. For me, my wife has to deal with it, but she's pretty cool about that, so I'm lucky.
And what's it like for these tasters? I mean, I would love to. I need to make a trip up there. You're not that far away.
Oh yeah,
I'd
man!
love
You
to
got a
take
place
part
to stay.
sometime in this. But I mean, what's it like? What's the atmosphere like? Is it more serious, joking around? I would imagine a bunch of beer people. It's a good time.
Oh yeah, it's exactly what you would imagine in terms of the beer people. But when there is data collection happening, which I'd say the maximum amount of time somebody will take completing a triangle test is like 2 or 3 minutes. It's really easy. It's like 3 questions.
Yeah.
But when they're doing it, I'm kind of a hawk, kind of watching over them. I really, Drew Beecham, a good friend of ours, Drew Beecham, is kind of noted as referring to what we're doing as sloppy citizen science or garage type science and whatnot. And it really, on some level, that's fun and it's quirky. But at the same time, I really value validity. I come from a scientific background, a social science background, which is very much about eliminating bias as much as possible in terms of stuff like this. And so we really aim to do that as much as we can. And so I'll shush people if they're talking, or even if they're not talking to each other while taking the test. But I'll shush people, and I really try to. Most people who come over nowadays are aware of my kind of analness when it comes to this thing, and know exactly what to do. And so we'll collect that data, and then as soon as it's done, we're already trying to write articles. So the articles that we write will usually do the little introduction piece and all of the methods. We can do that before the results are in, and I suggest to the guys that we do that because it allows us to write it without bias. So which I think lends an element of kind of genuineness to that first portion, because you get to see it. You're reading it before we know how things turned out, so you get our real thoughts in the introduction. You get to kind of see our thought process throughout the methods piece, and then we move in. We write about the results, and then we do our little discussion piece at the end. And then from there, what I'll do, this is kind of where it gets, it's really all on me, is I'll schedule. I have a calendar where I have different experiments scheduled for each Monday, and occasionally on Thursdays like today, or like this week, and I'll go pluck one of those out, and I get it all scheduled to publish when it does. And then I wake up really early in the morning and I share it everywhere. And, people say, oh, you're just trying to get clicks and all that. If that were the case, well, I think I've capped out on the clicks for homebrewing. This is a very small niche, and people don't realize that. It's so much fun to have the conversations with people. I love it. So when I go and I share on, Facebook and Reddit and Instagram and Twitter and all these different places, it's because I love what it incites. I really enjoy the conversation with people.
Yeah, I mean, that's often where a lot of the value is too. I've realized that. Like, we'll publish what I think is a phenomenal post, and it is great. But then the conversation afterwards, either in the comments or in the Facebook, or for you guys Reddit, sometimes that's more valuable than even the post itself. And you never know who's going to pop up in there. And it's funny. It is a really small world, and it's really cool seeing. It's cool seeing your friends. I'm sure you guys see a lot of the same names and same faces
all the time, man. And that's I feel like what Brülosophy has brought me more than anything. And I can't deny that there's an element of like homebrew celebrity. I'm sure you can relate with that. You get noticed sometimes when you go out and you do these homebrew things.
Super weird.
It's weird.
I'll never get used to it.
I like to think guys like you and me, Billy, will never get used to that. It's still so. I'm constantly like, somebody will notice me, and I'm like, I have to know them from somewhere in my childhood. I have to, But at the same time, I feel like as a steward of homebrewing, that there's some value in that, and that if we approach it in a way that's very positive and not contentious and not authoritative, but open and fun and all of that, I'm going to be homebrewing, I know, for at least, unless something tragic happens, at least for another 30 years or so. And I hope to be doing Brülosophy that entire time. And so I'm trying to kind of change my perspective on things a little bit, but yeah, it's a lot of fun in the community, and all of the conversations that this weird stuff elicits. Right. It's the best, man.
Yeah, we had a great discussion about that recently. We had a post or an email where we talked about the numbers declining for homebrewing overall, which a lot of sources say that they are. And I was kind of laughing. I was like, yeah, but like I'm in it for the long haul, and I know you guys are too. I was talking to our readers, and I said I can understand. And some of the reasons they were giving was because, and I understand, breweries are opening all over the place. If you have an awesome craft brewery right next door, you might be thinking, well, why brew my own? I buy all this gear and wait months and months and months for it to be ready. I can get an awesome IPA right there. But that's not why we do it. We do it for, like you said, for the culture, the lifestyle, and all that. And maybe it is declining, and maybe those people that were just doing it, for the beer, and now not so much for like the lifestyle aspects, they can get it next door. Totally cool. But the people that are still doing it, like us and our readers, I think it just makes that group even tighter.
Dude, I couldn't agree more, man. It's there's a very real threat to homebrewing if the decline is real and if it's significant, right? We're really close to the American Homebrewers Association, and I love everything they're doing, and I would hate to see those types of organizations see a hit because of a decline in homebrewing. And there's this part of me. Like I said, I agree with you that perhaps the people who are leaving that's making it look like there's a decline are those who don't experience it for the reasons we do. They're not in it for the reasons we are, which isn't just to brew a 10%, a clear beer and get wasted on a Friday night.
Right.
It's kind of funny that the times that I do that are usually when I'm not drinking homebrew, but that's another story. That's for another day, I guess. But I feel this responsibility, and as cheesy as this sounds, I feel this responsibility as somebody who has finally accepted that there's this thing that I've got with a little bit of influence, to do my part to make it not decline, to make those numbers not decline. And I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like, but I like to think that by making homebrewing more approachable, which 100% is what you guys are doing over there, and what I love about you guys, that is what's going to allow more people to enter this hobby. And that's an important thing to me on some level. And that's why, and I know I'm going on kind of a tangent here, but I think this is important. And so something that happened was when I moved from Denver to LA, where I am now. This might not be news to anyone, but LA has very small apartments, not a whole lot of room compared to where I was in Denver. And so the Brutus 10 that a lot of people know me for, I have the build on the website and everything, I had to leave that behind with a very fortunate friend, and now have the Grainfather. And I'm like, this thing it's so easy. It's so freaking easy, and it makes really good beer. And the Brutus 10 was great, but I had these 3 giant kettles, and I was dragging them up from my basement and then taking them out and hosing them off in the backyard. It was a lot of work. And this Grainfather is super simple. And that's why I don't like to see, and I can see how people, if they were brewing on a setup where it was more like that Brutus 10 and it was more work, a setup where it's just more work, and that would discourage them. Yeah. How maybe moving to something more like a Grainfather, but maybe even keep them in the hobby, or at least get more brew days in. Like I was saying earlier, and so that's why I don't like seeing people gear shame. And we did a post, a couple posts on the Grainfather, and you see this all over Facebook too. And people kind of gear shaming for these new systems, and there's different degrees of these things, right? Like the Grainfather is not that automated. You have some other ones like the Pico, I think. The Zymatic,
The Zymatic, but I say, man, the more people brewing, the better. And if that's the only way you can brew, if it's brew on the Zymatic or you don't homebrew at all, get the Zymatic. I couldn't agree more. And I love the term gear shaming.
But it's so true. And it's, so I had the awesome opportunity to talk to some of the guys who work for Grainfather in New Zealand, which is where they're based out of.
Oh, right. Yeah, you were just there.
Just recently. And this, it sounds so shilly at times, and I get that. But my God, are these guys thinking not only innovatively, but in terms of homebrewers? There are so many people out there who, and they're amazing companies. I'm not dissing them, but their focus is pro. Oh, there's a little left over for homebrewers. The entire hop industry is that way, and they have to be to make money and to stay in existence. And I get that. But Grainfather is a homebrew company. And that is what they are after. And I'll tell you what, they've got some crazy cool stuff coming out soon. Oh my God, man. Keep your eyes peeled. Get in contact with those guys for an interview. They're amazing. I'm dead serious.
Okay. Yeah, I spoke with them before when I was getting my system. I'll have to get back in touch.
Yes. And I don't use Grainfather equipment at this point in time, but that does not mean I won't always be that way. This stuff's amazing. I got to brew on a Grainfather for the first time over there. And like you said, I still felt like I was brewing, and it was easy. And that's the kind of stuff that I look at and I'm like, man, if we can get more people in the States brewing on Grainfathers, engaging in that community, not just Grainfathers, Zymatics. I mean, come on, and coming out and sharing their beer with friends and creating that community that is what kept me in this hobby. That's the point of all of this, in my opinion. We are way off on a tangent, but I love this. This is what it's about. This is what it's about. So,
yeah, exactly.
Anyways.
Yeah. I don't think to be a real brewer that you have to have bloody knuckles and be drenched in sweat.
No.
And have a full workout after the day is over. You can focus. It's about the end product at the end of the day. It really is. So, and no matter how you get there in the way that's best for you.
Yeah, exactly. Amen, man.
So I want to ask you, so how have all these experiments affected your personal brewing? I know you mainly do the experiments now when you do brew, but say you weren't doing an experiment, just wanted to knock out a batch of whatever your favorite beer style to brew is. How compare this to, let's see, you guys started in 2014, around there. So 2013, how would these two batches look different?
Oh man. Oh yeah. I've never actually considered it that way. So there are some definite things that I've changed in terms of perspective on brewing process. So I think the biggest thing, so you've got, Charlie Papazian, whose big relax, don't worry, have a homebrew saying has become an interestingly used quip among people who still don't know how to relax and not worry about homebrewing. So it seems. Back then, I used to think I was, I refer to myself as the lazy homebrewer and all that stuff. But I looking back, I realize now that was not the case. There are certain things, for example, trub carryover from the kettle to the fermenter. That is, I don't pour all of my wort from the kettle into the fermenter, but I certainly don't worry about what makes it over there. So that's the one thing. And to the point that it's no longer even a thought in my mind, even when I'm doing the experiments, rather than waiting for all the trub to settle out, I'll just stir it up before I rack to each carboy so that it gets equal amount of trub as opposed to none at all.
There you go.
Right? Yeah. Nice. Some of the bigger things I think that people would be surprised about are, I'm a big lager fan. And so I make, I've got a Vienna lager on now. I'll have a German Pils on in a couple of weeks. It's what I brew all the time. The fermentation temperature experiments on using lager yeasts have probably blown my mind more than any of the other experiments that we've done, only because I was so married to this idea that fermentation temperature for lagers in particular really, really mattered. And when I'm tasting a Pilsner that was fermented at 50 degrees next to a Pilsner that was fermented at 70 degrees, and I can't tell them apart, and a majority of the people or a significant portion of the people I'm serving it to blind can't tell them apart, that has an influence. And I've done it, 3 times now, and it's still, till this day, we have yet to achieve a significant result. That's a big one for me. Gotcha.
And the gelatin, were you using that before you started these experiments?
It was actually, I did an experiment, a sort of an experiment, about 3 years ago now, where I had 4 or 5 of my closest friends here in Fresno. I gave them all the same amount of the same grain and hops and yeast, and I asked them, go back and brew this beer. And we all got together, or we all brewed those beers, and then we got together and we tasted them. And of course, they all tasted drastically different. We called this the Brewer's Thumbprint, which ended up getting published in BYO. But in that experiment, there was one guy, his name's Brad Gaines, one of the nicest brewers you'll ever meet. He's now an associate brewer over at House of Pendragon here in Fresno, Clovis area. And but he, during that time, he brought this beer. No one else has looked nearly as beautiful as his, and it was just crystal clear. And we had made them 3 weeks ahead of time, and I'm looking at this beer going, man, how did you do this? And he kind of gives me that it was gelatin, man. Well, I'd kind of heard of it, but seeing it in real life, that was the experience that motivated the experiment, which I brewed the following weekend. And so the gelatin effect, part one, that experiment where I compared those two hoppy beers where one was crystal clear and the other was hazy as heck, that was inspired by my buddy Brad, actually. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. So, man, I've gone way over. I'm taking up too much of your time. We had some reader questions.
No
Maybe
problem.
We can come back and do it again some other time and get those in. But I do want to ask you, because this is a common question I got. People want to experiment. They want to experiment, maybe not do the same types of experiments that you guys are doing, but they want to know. There's so many variables in homebrewing, and they want to know which hops should I use in this IPA, which yeast strain should I use? Yeah. Does it really make a difference how I mash this beer? What's like one tip you can give to help people who want to experiment, but they kind of want to do the 80-20? They want to focus on where they can get the best results without having to do experiment after experiment after experiment.
Yeah. I think that type of experimentation, that's what I refer to as the like low risk kind of safe experimentation.
It's more of a side by side, I guess. Yeah. Versus like with statistical significance.
Yeah.
P-values.
Oh no, you don't need to do that.
Triangle tasting. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I'll be at the SoCal Homebrewers Fest giving a talk exactly on how you can get into experimentation without all that junk.
Okay.
But I think the easiest way, really is, let's say somebody really likes Pliny the Elder, as everyone on earth seems to really like, but they want to make a beer that's unique and it's all their own. Maybe start with Pliny the Elder and make a tweak or two. I mean, this is pretty commonly advised approach to messing around with stuff, but make a tweak or two. If you want to do some side-by-sides, split off the batch, post boil, and dry hop one with different hops, ferment one with different yeast. If you do it right, there's very little, in my experience, that is going to really ruin a beer outside of contamination. And contamination is relatively easy to control if you're not, a slob. I mean, that's the truth. If you're not a slob, or if an accident doesn't happen.
Right.
And so if you can control contamination, I mean, you can make the same beer, split it into two, 3-gallon fermenters and ferment one with cow ale, like Pliny is, and then the other one with a Saison yeast, and you're going to have a drinkable beer. It's going to be unique. You're going to have two separate beers, and then you have some data of your own to rely on. It's stuff like that. Dry hop with different hops. There's so many different things that people can do to get into kind of personal experimentation. That's not only fun, but you learn something, along the way.
Yeah, and I think that the post-boil advice is really good too. I hear some people, they start to get into experimenting and they start doing 2 different mashes and everything, and that just it's a lot more work. Yeah,
it is so much work. There are very few brew days nowadays between the 6 of us doing this where we don't have 2 mashes going at the same time, and it really is. You have to you have to do it in the morning because we all like to drink in the afternoon, right? And that first beer, you start to not care so much, and you gotta kind of get it out of the way. So
I love that. Yeah. And two, I always say make big tests. Like, don't do a tiny little test where maybe there might be a result and some kind of difference, but test big things. So if you're really trying to find a great new hop, don't pick 2 hops that have very similar descriptions. Test wide, not narrow, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So maybe you test an American variety. You're just totally agnostic to what you use. You just want something new. Test an American variety versus a noble hop and just see what you get.
Absolutely, man. One of the and even for the weird kind of the weird variables that we test, even with our dual mash variables and whatnot, we're still trying to test the extreme for the most part. And the way I look at it is, it's kind of you start to narrow things down. So if this extreme produces a significant result, then maybe next time it won't be so extreme, and then after that it'll be even less extreme. But if that extreme difference doesn't prove to have a noticeable effect, well, then that's the fun. I mean, oh my God, look at this. I can mash at 148 or 162 and those beers taste exactly the same, despite being almost a point apart in ABV, a percentage apart in ABV. I mean, it's just amazing, that kind of stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. And then you have your answer instead of starting really narrow and then saying, oh, we should have gone more extreme from the start. Right. And then you got to go back to the beginning.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to accept some questions, by the way. No rush. So.
Sure. Okay. Well, let me get a couple in here.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we do have to talk about this one. We got a bunch of questions about this because you guys we had a post on Lodo, and then you guys had one too. So it wasn't like a specific question. It was just a bunch of tell me about Lodo. We don't have time to go way too into that. So let's make this the one question. So what's the status of this whole process, and maybe talk a little bit just briefly about what it is and sort of where you guys are going with it.
Sure.
Because I assume that this conversation's not over.
Oh God, no.
Brewing. Yeah.
So what is about a year ago now, just a bit over a year ago, we were informed about a PDF is what they usually refer to it as, but really a paper, and a really well-written paper about low oxygen brewing that ended up being called, this method ended up being called LODO because of low dissolved oxygen. And it was fascinating. And I think, like a lot of other people out there reading over it, I kind of, I looked at it and said, boy, this sure seems esoteric. And when it came out, it was absolute. I think the guys who helped to construct this paper will admit that it was very absolute in tone. There were some recommendations in it, for example, to use not only to use sodium metabisulfite, but also to use 100 milligrams per liter of this SMB. So anyways, that's that. When it came out, we were very curious, just as I am with any new information that comes out. And those of us who were in the Brülosophy group, we started talking about this, and lo and behold, two of the guys actually kind of two and a half. One of them was kind of already on this path, but two of them had already kind of been involved in the German Brewing Forum and had really kind of bought into this idea, and not wanting to go and pick up a whole bunch of the new equipment that they said was required at the time. And they've done a good job of kind of saying, hey, well, you can still make, gradual progress towards these benefits. I figured I'll let these guys who are already into it, one of them being Jake Houlihan, who recently published the article, right, the experiment article that you're referring to, and he was really into it and started messing around with it and brewed a whole bunch of batches, kind of different iterations with different steps missing, and he was just trying to learn the process. And once he finally felt like he had the process down, we decided to give it a shot and test it out. And basically, what we did was a Lodo, as true to style, as true to the PDF as possible Lodo batch, compared to a non-Lodo batch, or what we were kind of calling a high-do batch.
I love it.
not because it was high DO, but I guess relative, it was pretty high. But and so that was kind of it took us 8 months to get this thing planned, and we consulted with some people from the German Brewing Forum. Great guys. I don't know if you'll meet a more passionate group of people when it comes to a specific method, approach, or even style of beer, because they're so dedicated to crafting the best Bavarian Helles possible. And me too, man. There's something so admirable about that. As much as I might question the methods, I certainly appreciate the passion that they've invested in this. And so anyways, we decided to test it out. And that resulted in the paper, or the article that was published last week. Yeah.
So check this out, guys. It's on Brülosophy right now. I think you'll see it on there. It's one of the more, I don't know when this is going to go live, but right now it's the second most recent one. Title is the Lodo Effect. Okay, 410.
Yeah, April 10th, I think is when it came out.
April 10th, yeah. Okay, yeah, and I think this is going to go on for a while, this conversation. And I love that you guys are raising this conversation. And I think there's probably more questions at this point than answers.
Oh, indeed. And something that I do want to address, because I think if people go read that article, they're going to have some of the same concerns that folks who have I call them Lodo advocates, the people who really advocate for the process, respectfully. One of the big things is that the Lodo batch that Jake brewed came in, I don't recall the exact numbers, but it was about 8 specific gravity points lower than the Haido batch. And our thinking in designing the experiment, in the 6 months that it took us to put this thing together, in all of our consultation with people who have been brewing Lodo for months, our thinking was, we have to accept on some level, since it was a consistent result for Jake, that was an effect of the variable being tested. And if that's true, then for this very first one, we're going to let it be what it is. We're not going to correct for OG. We're not going to do anything of the sort, because we don't want to erase any of the impact that Lodo had. Now, one of the claims that was originally made about Lodo was that 100% of people, or at least most people, would prefer a Lodo beer over a non-Lodo beer. And right. I doubt any claims where that say 100% of anything, particularly in terms of preference. And I doubt it respectfully. It's just that's a big claim for a psychologist like me to accept. Okay. And so that wasn't the case. People tended to prefer, in fact, the Hido, the non-Lodo beer. But we didn't make any claims about what that means, that the Hido is better. In fact, we tried our best to say that, it could have been some other reason that the Lodo beer wasn't preferred by most. But and another thing I'd like to address is that Jake was one of the few people. He in his summation of the beer and his evaluation of it, he did note noticing some sulfur. I've talked to him a million times, and it wasn't like it was a sulfur bomb. He noticed some quaint sulfur, and that got, people kind of got hung up on that. Why would you serve a beer that had sulfur in it? Well, if it's a function of the variable, then we're going to do it. And that's the way this works. Now, if we can figure out ways to bring those OGs closer and to reduce that sulfur while still keeping it Lodo, you better believe we're going to bring it back up and we're going to test it again. And that's just the way this works. So.
Yeah, and this is not an easy process. Like you said, it took you guys 6 months, 8 months to put this experiment together, and the process of brewing a Lodo beer is not easy.
There's a reason I didn't do it. I mean, it's true, and it's I get, there is some kind of esotericism to it. There's a lot of relying on traditional, traditionally recommended processes, and I love that. That doesn't mean I think it's necessary. Of course it's not. We're all making beer without it. But for some people, it's going to produce the beer that they want to drink more. And that's awesome, man. More power to them.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that it sparks a conversation, and it certainly has, that gets more people involved in this, and maybe people lend you guys a hand and do their own experiments. And it seems like the potential upside of this is great enough that it's worth exploring more. And who knows what it's going to lead to. Maybe there's a way to do it where it's not such a bear to go through this process. And maybe there's some new technology or an innovation to get that same result that they claim is out there of this higher quality, better tasting beer without having to go through all these painstaking details. I don't know, but I think it's good that we're having the conversation, because that's the only way that you get to that point. Yeah, totally. And to their credit, I say I don't mean to speak of them too generally, but to their credit, they're starting to come around and saying, well, maybe we're pulling back from how absolute this paper made things sound, and you can make these gradual steps to get closer and closer to that. Because they're pretty all or nothing. I think originally it was, but my understanding from what I've read recently and in our conversations, following the release of the experiment, is that, well, maybe not. There are people out there who are, for example, chilling they're pre-boiling their strike water and then chilling with a copper immersion chiller when it's supposed to be. It was originally recommended to be stainless, and they're saying that they're getting benefit from the Lodo process. So that to me is really cool. Yeah, and it's this. We take these iterative steps to really try to discover what it is. And little secret, and they all know this because I've talked to most of the big people in the Lodo world privately. My favorite beer on earth right now is Hofbrau's original Helles. and maybe it's because I get something special in it. And have I been able to replicate that? I haven't really tried very hard, but no. And so maybe there is something to this use of sodium metabisulfite and really ultimately the reduction of oxygen throughout the brewing process. And if there is, yay, man, let's do it. Let's get it out there. I agree. I'm a huge fan of German beers. I've done a few trips over there. A lot of blurry memories from that place, the Hopper House.
Yes.
Managed to get myself a glass. I won't say how.
I won't tell you my story about the Hofbrau house. It resulted in me washing a shoe off the following day. I'll just tell you that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hofbrau stories are the best stories.
Oh my God, man. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks again so much, man. This has been amazing. We got to do it again. I want everyone to, after you watch this, check out brewlosophy.com. And what else do you have going on? Where can people see you, find you? I know you have the podcast now, so everyone check that out. You guys have a few episodes up. I just saw the. Do you have 2 or 3 up now?
Well, it's 2 real episodes. We got a little teaser episode up as well, but we will be dropping the 3rd episode this Thursday, which, depending on when we go live with this video here, it may already be out there. But yeah, we're trying to bump up our production schedule on the podcast as well. I'm find myself at a lot of brewing events or home brewing events lately, so just kind of keep your eyes peeled there. Yeah, and I can't leave without thanking you for your Keezer build, because if it wasn't for that, mine wouldn't look as pretty as it does today. Watching you and your dad build that collar for your oh man, I loved it, and that is the Keezer that I still have today. So thank you for that, man.
Yeah, no problem. It's so cool seeing all these builds that people have created. I mean, and I didn't come up with the collar idea. I got it from a few people off Homebrew Talk, and then decided to put something together that was more comprehensive. And it's just so cool seeing these pictures. I'm like, I don't know if I inspired that one or not, but I'll take credit for it.
Yeah, it sure looks the same, doesn't it? Yeah.
My dad still asks me about that. Again, that didn't make the trip with me, and that it was left with that same fortunate friend back in Denver. My dad still asks about that, and he's like, okay, but it's still with your buddy Forrest, right? I'm like, yeah, I'll see it. It's still in the family.
That's good enough. Yeah. Well, yeah, awesome, man. It's working great for me. So
that's awesome. Cool. All right, man. Thanks again, and we will keep in touch for sure.
All right, brother. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, dude. That was great.
Oh.